Before we talk about order of operations, I want to talk a little bit about exponents. So when we have something like 8 to the power of 2, so it's a superscript, it's raised up a little bit, so it's not 82. It's a base of 8, we call that the base, and this is called then an exponent, or they'll say a power sometimes, or power. So you can say 8 to the power of 2, or 8 raised to the second power, or 8 exponent 2, something like that. And it means 8 times 8, okay? So if I had something like, 3 to the fourth power, we would say 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. That's what it would be equivalent to. There's a couple special ones. So if you have x squared, if it's to the second power, it's said to be squared. And if you had y to the third power, you'd say y cubed. Other than that, we usually just say to the fourth power, fifth power, or whatever. Okay, so example 3 here, simplify. A is 5 cubed, so we're saying 5 times 5 times 5, and then they want us to figure that out. It's 125. I knew that one. Okay, but if you don't know it, then you do multiplication by hand or with a calculator. 1 to the seventh power, so you're saying 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. Do I really need to write these out? No, but I'm going to. 4, 5, oops. So I said 5 and I wrote 5. 5, 6, 7, but 1 times 1 is just 1, right? So all of that's just going to equal 1. Even though there's 7 ones, 1 is the multiplicative identity, and so 1 times anything is just itself. So 1 times 1 is 1, which makes it still 1. Anyway, you get the idea. Now we're going to talk about the order of operations. So you look at this expression right here. It's an expression, no equal sign. And you have 4 times 2 plus 1. Well, how do you know which to do first? Do you add the 1? Do you add 2 and 1? Or do you do the multiplication first? It makes a difference. And that's why we have what's called the order of operations. So the order of operations, you might remember, there's a couple acronyms. One is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So I'm going to write it like that. When my son was in school and I kept saying, please excuse my, I was trying to help him with his math, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And he just was not getting what I was saying. And then finally he looks at me and he says, oh, do you mean Pemdas? Yeah, so I guess that's another acronym we have, Pemdas, that's what they say. But what it stands for is P is for parentheses. And you may have heard of Pemdas, because really for P, we mean any type of grouping symbol coming first. So you do what's in the grouping symbols before you do other things. E is for exponents. M and D are multiplication and division. And you don't do one first and then the other. A lot of students make that mistake. They think, oh, you do all the multiplication first and then all the division. No, it goes from left to right. So whatever comes first, left to right, you do first. So if you're looking at your expression, you're reading from left to right, you do the multiplication first or the division first, whichever comes first along the line of your expression. And it's the same with addition and subtraction. They work together, left to right. So we'll give you some examples. Okay, so first example, it says 12 minus 5 times 2. So according to Pemdas, you just start at the list. There aren't any grouping symbols, there's no exponents. So right away, I'm going to go to the multiplication, and I'm going to do that first. 12 minus 10, because 5 times 2 is 10. And then 12 minus, now I can do the subtraction, 12 minus 10 is 2. That was the only thing left to do. So you see students sometimes on these problems and they'll write, little symbols around their paper. It's best to get a line by line approach so you can see what you're doing. and you're replacing one piece as you go along. Okay, in part B, we do have a grouping symbol. That means we're going to do the parentheses first. And I'm just underlining it so you can see what I'm doing, but you don't have to underline it when you're working. 12 minus 5 is 7. Now I no longer need the parentheses because I've done what's in the parentheses. Now I have 7 times 2, and 7 times 2 is 14. So I get two different answers, even though the numbers were the same and the operations were the same. It had the parentheses on part B, but not on part A, and you get two different answers. Okay, so that's how we do that one. Now we'll look at this next one. It's a little bit bigger. So I have a grouping symbol. I see that, parentheses, so I'm going to go to that. And I'm just copying down the rest. Now, on the last one, I said, well, you don't have to put the parentheses because you did what's in the parentheses. I put the parenthesis because I'm going to indicate that it's multiplication. I want it to look like 10 times 1. I don't want it to look like 101. So it's 10 times 1. That's what's indicated here. You could put a dot, 10, with the multiplication dot times 1. Okay, now we'll do the multiplication and division from left to right. So the first thing I have is this, 30 divided by 5. That's going to be 6 plus, and now I can also do the multiplication. 10 times 1 is 10. And then now last I'll do the addition, 6 plus 10, 16. And that's what we get for that one. Okay, so I think this is our last one, a little more complicated with some two sets of grouping symbols here. You always want to make sure those grouping symbols match up. So if you put a parenthesis, you've got to close that parenthesis off. That'll help you when you go to do work in the calculator as well. Okay, so let's look inside our grouping symbol. And inside the square brackets, we see parentheses. That means we have to do the parentheses inside the brackets before we do anything else. So it's going to be 4 times 9 plus 3 is 12. And we have it look like that. Okay, 9 plus 5 cubed minus, now I'm inside the square brackets and I want to do that multiplication, 4 times 12, which is 48. I can just write a 48. I could put parentheses around it or the square brackets if I wanted to, but it's not necessary. So now the grouping symbols are taken care of. Now I need to do the exponent. So fortunately, we did 5 cubed earlier. If you didn't know what it was, you'd just go off to the side and write 5 times 5 times 5 and you'd figure it out. It's 125. And then you want to make sure you go from left to right. Now in this particular problem, it might not make a difference, but in the future it will, so just get in the habit. 9 plus 125 is going to be what? 134 minus 48. Oh, and I have to do subtraction. Don't be afraid to use your paper to help you. If you're doing this by hand and you're like, I can't, I'll figure that out. Go back to the old methods we have, where you borrow and you can't talk and do this at the same time. But that's what your paper is for. It's to help you to do the math. So I think I get 86. So you can check it for me. All right. Very good.